Okay, everyone, we're going to get started today. Again, this is Maitland Muse hosting today's webinar in terms of some of the lessons that we learned after a relatively tough 2019 with ransomware, malware, malicious activity throughout, and how you can take a preventative approach in 2020 to really harden your infrastructure and hopefully leverage AppGuard. With me, I'm very glad to have two members of our organization here in AppGuard. Kristen Gandhi, who's our VP of Vice President of Customer Success. Kristen, say hello.
How's it going today, Maitland and everyone?
Thanks for joining us, Kristen. Appreciate it. In addition, we have Tomer Bitton, who's our Vice President of Research. Very pleased to have you, Tomer. Excited to listen to some of the things you're going to share as well. Tomer, say hello.
Thank you, Maitland. Hi, everyone.
Great. Thank you so much. So let's get started. We will take maybe 35, 40 minutes of your time. Please, if you have questions, submit them in the window. We will get to questions and Q&A at the end. But certainly look forward to having a good overview session with you all today. So as I mentioned before, we're going to go through some of the lessons that we've learned with the attack activity that has occurred, as we all know, at a heightened level in 2019. And then what we can do to take a preventative approach in 2020, again, with AppGuard, the focus of that discussion as your frontline security. So we know 2019 was a record-setting year, unfortunately, in a couple of different ways. From the Theft Resource Center, the number of data breaches that were tracked, a huge number, increased 17% year over year. Kristen, an outstanding number. Ransomware, as we know, also increased. I know we'll talk about that in a second. But as we can see from here, whether it's a federal or state agency, across all verticals, businesses, banks, institutions, it appears at the highest rate, no one's safe. Small, medium, and large businesses, consumer records we know are under extreme attack. And everyone's questioning how do they keep up. Zero-day malware is being launched at a record pace, over 1 million new launches per day across the world. And I guess the fact is bad doers, malicious actors are being paid a lot of money to do their job, so they're getting better at it. That leads to us to think about what can we do better? How do we improve when we start to look at the different areas? Microsoft had a data breach. There were over 250 million records were recently exposed. There were over $126 million in fines and counting from a GDPR breach. Good old Mr. Amazon, Jeff Bezos himself, his iPhone was hacked. No one's safe. Increasing devices with IoT are opening up additional vulnerabilities, as we know. GE healthcare devices are increasingly vulnerable to cyber attacks. Over 200 million modems are now at risk for cable companies. And as they're getting closer and more to your home, wireless, internet-based, obviously bad guys figure out different ways to get in. And that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges. Kristen, let me just ask, I mean, customer success is so important to us here at AppGuard. You in particular, in helping us ensure that our customers are satisfied. I mean, what do we do? What's going on? What do you see?
Well, I mean, what we're seeing in the environment right now is instead of targeting your web server and taking down a company's web server for a few hours with something like Heartbleed from a few years ago, what we're seeing is people have realized, attackers have realized that the real value is in the data. The real value is in taking control of the organization and getting control of what the organization's intellectual property. And that a lot of organizations that really haven't thought of themselves as cybersecurity targets in the past are being targeted now. In fact, there's by some accounts, there's over a 60% increase in ransomware over the past year. And we're seeing instead of just your financials, your large organizations, we're seeing little mom and pop type of organizations, small municipalities, hospitals, healthcare systems, etc., all being targeted. And what's happening is they're not being attacked by the latest newest vulnerabilities. They're being attacked through vulnerabilities that have existed for years by turning people's own applications against them. And what we need to start thinking about is, instead of trying to constantly run, let's come back. Let's come back and think about preventing the problems to begin with.
That's a great point, and it's interesting, Kristen, as we talk about some of the ransomware hits across, multiple industries, and I know we've got partners as well as customers here from Canada. Saskatchewan's e-health records were held hostage by cyber criminals in late 2019. A medical center had to reschedule elective procedures after being shut out of its systems.
Yeah.
Shut down.
Yeah, and there's also a study that came out in November saying that there's an increase in fatal heart attacks, specifically can be tied to the effects of ransomware and the remediation efforts that it takes as a result.
So no one's safe. I mean, no one's safe. It's more and more difficult. The impacts on our individual health as well, if we're in these security positions, from a CISO perspective, CTO, CIO, the challenges are getting broader for people to do their jobs. And it is, as you said, Kristen, great insight there, starting to really affect our health. So what we got to do something differently. And I think if we look at a lot of the approaches in terms of how the life cycle of an attack, and you said it earlier, malicious actors, hackers in general, they basically look for vulnerabilities in the individual, in particular in an application, which we know from an app development standpoint, security was not the first thought in building out that application. So what they do, and this slide in particular speaks well to how they get in, is very simply, they find a vulnerability in the application, they hide behind that application, they get into the operating system, and then they can do whatever they want to basically, in the end, hold hostage the information that they've been able to get their hands around. What needs to happen, obviously, is finding a preventive way to basically eliminate an application's ability to do these things, right? When you say that's an effective solution to put forth?
Sure, it's certainly one of the best options that you've got on the table.
So what I think, in terms of what we need to do going forward, is we've got to focus on how do we reduce that attack vector, right? How do you implement policies? If only there were a product. I bet we're going to share how we can do that in a second. So one of the things that we know is that, again, 93% of all enterprise attacks, they stem from something that unfortunately an individual does based off of what they thought was a trusted or safe application, gets access into a system. So knowing that this increases, we've got to better protect the unfortunate behaviors that we know will continue to occur. At the end of the day, people, you can have the biggest red sign that says don't click a button. You can go through numerous hours of training. You can be tricked by your IT organizations left, right, and sideways. And someone is going to click a button that I know I'm not supposed to. So we need to help prevent and protect. And for those partners that we have out here, the time is such a great opportunity for us right now to provide a higher level of service and support to your customers that you're working with. Apologize for that. So what we see is that looking at OS segmentation, which is where we know is a very strong security strategy, is to implement an OS segmentation policy and to get some additional visibility into your system so that you as a enterprise for one, as a MSSP for another, or even potentially a reseller in some instances here, are able to provide a higher level of service to your customers using a solution that basically implements zero trust framework, allows you to segment the system and user space, which we'll get into in a second, but also allow policies to drive and protect the behaviors and avoid any rogue apps from doing any application damage. What do we mean by that? So AppGuard, as an approach, basically, we're a software-based endpoint solution that's designed to take away an application's ability to be turned against the operating system. In its simplest form, AppGuard protects the integrity of the operating system by using location-based and predetermined lists to establish the proper OS segmentation. That OS segmentation is built around, again, the system space and user space at pre-launch, and then obviously leveraging our isolation and inheritance, patented isolation and inheritance technologies to further define the OS segmentation. Let's talk a little bit more about that, not getting too technical. Kristen?
I'll actually move it up a level. In fact, when you think about how are these people getting in and how does an attack ultimately become successful? Well, you have to think about where does it come from? It comes from changes being introduced into the system or services being exposed to be able to be changed. So what we do, and one way to kind of skin that cat is you can think about, first of all, where is it coming from? If it's coming from an area on the system that is subject to a lot of that entropy, your downloads folder, your home directory, your documents folder, maybe you shouldn't even let it launch at all, or at least consider it much more carefully. But if it's something where it was installed by an administrator, being your Microsoft Office, for example, chances are you're going to need to run that. That's where whitelisting kind of ends, but that's really just the beginning of what our software can do. Once we allow something to launch, we need to take the next step and say, well, what is it going to do? Is it something that could be a target for these attackers to actually gain control of the system? So in other words, is it a browser that's reaching out to the internet and users are interacting with it and downloading things? Is it an email system? Is it a program like Adobe Acrobat where people are getting files from the outside all the time and launching it with that application? These types of applications are real targets for these types of attacks because they're so common, almost everybody's got them, and they have to be designed to allow these changes to your system to happen because that's what they do. They modify your system. So what we would do for those types of programs is we'd watch them much more carefully and prevent them from doing things like making a registry change or writing to protected areas of the operating system or scraping your memory. And honestly, in most cases, that's how an attacker ultimately gains control of your operating system.
And basically, we guard and prevent them from doing anything bad that they're not supposed to based on some of the predefined policies or rule adjustments that may be made from the administrator level, right?
Yeah.
Great. So interestingly enough, as we switch to the next slide and we think about some of the traditional technologies, both AVs and EDR solutions, and we built this around the NIST framework, which is, obviously built on a detect and respond framework. In fact, NIST just recently released new guidelines that basically said in today's environment, detect and respond faster. So let's think about that for a second. They said detect and respond faster so you can mitigate your losses. Well, one of the things that I believe we're trying to get across here is we want to introduce a new level of cybersecurity, a now preventative approach to prevent the exploit from occurring, which obviously puts you in a much better situation where you can mitigate whatever has occurred later, but it's much better to avoid the exploit, to prevent something from happening, than to let it happen and sweep it under the carpet and hope it doesn't do too much damage. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. But even more, credit where credit is due. NIST did come out with a draft just a few weeks ago about the zero trust framework and how organizations are more and more looking to implement that kind of strategy. And that's really where, when you look at, things like whitelisting solutions, firewalls that have advanced capabilities, all of these technologies need to work together within your organization in order to affect a real preventative approach. Ultimately, if you're in the business of trying to identify the intentions of what something is doing, you're going to fail.
Yeah.
Just the way any human is going to fail in that activity,
right.
Any AI ultimately will make a mistake because an AI is only as smart as the data that you give to it.
Yeah, and that's one of our differences too here in that, we continuously monitor and adapt to make sure that we're enforcing all the authorized actions. We're blocking the applications, again, going to that preventative mode that are trying to perform any suspicious activity, which, by the way, without even having to know that it's malware. We're not looking for any particular signatures. These are all great benefits to AppGuard. We're not an AV nor an EDR as a solution, but we enhance both. We make AVs better, stronger, more resilient, and so we can be complementary to the majority of the solutions that are out there. But in the end game, ultimately, our goal should be to not only provide a high level of prevention and protection, but more importantly, to help customers optimize their cyber stacks in a manner that they've been throwing a lot at it, thinking that's the answer, right?
I mean, you've been told for years and years, if you subscribe to CIS or OWASP or any of these types of frameworks, that to apply the principle of least privilege to harden your systems. And I don't know if anyone here has to be an administrator, but trying to get to actually harden the system and all of that activity, maybe you get to do it on your servers. Maybe if you're really lucky, your workstation endpoint image will be there, but it's difficult to maintain. It becomes a real challenge. And, really what our software is in a manner of speaking is that principle, least privilege applied to the operating system at a systematic level.
Well, that's zero trust in a nutshell, right? You don't trust anything, and the only way that trust grows, in essence, is through policy adjustments, recommendations that may be made, that, again, the administrator will be the only one that applies any variations to those rules. But at the end of the day, to implement zero trust means there's nothing that you're going to turn a blind eye to. So,
and really, that's what it comes down to, is being able to prevent and having an easier way to do that from here going forward. Because because we're at a point with the number of attacks that are happening right now. It's no longer I'm trying to target everybody with this vulnerability. It's now I'm trying to target me.
Yeah. I'm a big target, by the way.
Absolutely.
I'm a big target. So this is interesting because, whether you are an enterprise, which we have several enterprises, large and small, on this call with us, whether you're a reseller, one of our MSSP partners, or other, you have to look at things in a very different manner today. You have to constantly be aware and constantly update your environment and be aware of what you have and be aware of how your users are operating as well. In doing so, you have to either offer certain threat assessments and vulnerability services or as well as value-added services, or as an enterprise, utilize these services to ensure, basically from our perspective and yours, that your operating system is hardened. In doing so, there's a range of things that you need to consider that actually can be, again, very complex for the IT and CIO and CISO owner, whether it's a vulnerability assessment, pen test for their existing environment, obviously applications on both the mobile and web side, what they have. Very important to understand and determine if their current approach is hardened enough, or if they even have hardening, as we're finding more and more. This has not been considered. What are they doing in terms of how do they protect against zero-day malware? This is the life of a CISO today in his entire organization, to make sure that the organization that he is responsible for is as protected as possible, that they can respond to any issues that may happen in a timely manner, and most importantly, have the tools in place to prevent anything from happening that could actually, in many cases, as we know from some of these breaches, put a company out of business, take down a brand and a reputation they've built over the many years, and Kristen, as you pointed out earlier, take down people's personal health because they just know they're not protected from either a budget or other reason. So in doing so, they have to, everyone on this call, one way or another, has to consider these different tools and capabilities and the techniques as well. How do you integrate with a SIM, some of which we have listed here? What are the techniques that you have in place? There is a lot to consider. There is a lot of partners, a lot of companies, in fact, some complementary, many of which are our competitors as well, who sound alike, who are making a lot of noise, that you've got to help get the right decisions and have the right advisors around you, but more importantly, have the right trusted advisor like an AppGuard by your side. That leads us actually to this next piece of our overview today that we're really excited about. Tomer's going to take you through a few slides that will just explain a new tool that we plan on launching in the very near future that will help our customers and our partners do their jobs much better, but also provide different levels of the previous slide in terms of assessment type services. Tomer, we're really excited about this. We'll go in and out, and I'll leave it to you. You want me to click? You want to click yourself?
I will click. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Tomer.
So implementing the Zero Trust framework might be a challenge. So we are here in AppGuard. We have developed a few innovative and cutting-edge technologies and tools to try and help our customers and future customers and make deployment much more easier and get their final goals much more faster. So we have developed a cloud-based, fully automated framework which is based on microservices to try and automate and reduce the overhead that our future customers and current customers will have to allocate in order to implement a Zero Trust framework. So it basically runs in the cloud. It can also run on-prem. It aggregates, enrich, and classify the main core events coming from the AppGuard agent. It enriches data using threat intelligence feeds, mostly for files, vulnerabilities, CVEs, this kind of information. It basically maps policies and core events coming from the AppGuard agent to a known security standards and best practices. Just for an example, like the MITRE attack framework. So we basically can map a policy and or an event to a specific attack vectors and enrich the data and give you more information about procedures, groups, specific software, specific attacks, specific techniques, and give you the information if the organization is currently potentially vulnerable to this kind of attack vector or not. It also have lots of reporting capabilities, reporting for executive, very high level stuff, for IT guys, researchers, and analysts. So it can get pretty technical and give like information coming from the operation system and coming from the classification. So a few options for reporting. It has easy integration, basically using APIs to customers and SOC tools. So usually customers will, like to use their own tools and proprietary tools like SIEM or any other tool that they have been developed by themselves. So we can easily integrate into that and provide information with their specific format. So let's say Slack notification, SIEM, ServiceNow, we can open tickets, enrich the ticket, obviously, provide information, and then close the tickets. Event notification using email, using Slack, or any other feed channel that the customer is currently working with.
That's a lot of information, Tomer. There's a heck of a lot going on there.
So we can provide statistics at any time, daily statistics, daily reports, weekly, monthly, by customers, by events, aggregations. So you can see on the right side the core events. It's basically a breakdown coming from customers and which events basically trigger the most, which agent events will basically trigger the most. On the left side, you can see a breakdown by devices, if it's coming from servers, if it's coming from laptops, with classification and everything. So you can see which device actually created most of the events and on which one we need to be more focused. Binaries classification, extracting information from binaries. So you can see at the bottom, at the top, the vendors, like certificates, breakdown by code. So we can provide a lot of information at any time.
And do you need any extra data for this, or is it just the data that we've got in our, if you've already deployed AppGuard?
So it depends. Some of the data can be extracted from the core events, and some of the data is coming from enrichment feeds, like threat intelligence feeds. So it depends which data exactly, but it can be combined. We can also If the customer has its own feeds and its own data resources, so we can integrate with that and then give a better classification per specific customer or per specific sector. So we also do static analysis. We can provide application inventory with classification. So we try, once we have events, we try to download the files, the binaries from threat intelligence feeds, do static analysis of the file, like PE header analysis, try to look for bad indicators inside, metadata analysis of the file, certificate analysis, see if that's okay, and then provide classification for each application and provide you like an application inventory. There you can see all the applications and the locations they are currently running, even if it's dormant. So you can see the entire inventory.
So hey, Tomer, just before you go, work a little bit more about that application inventory. Again, using the AppGuard tool to get this information. Go a little bit more in terms of the inventory that we're able to, or the insight, I guess, we're able to give our customers.
Sure. So basically, once the process is executed, so obviously we can see the path, we can see the hash, we can see some indicators from the file. We try to get the file from threat intelligence feed, we download it, and then we can provide more information. We can see the product version, for an example. This is a metadata coming from the file, and then we can correlate a specific version with CVE databases and say, okay, this is, just as an example, let's say a Word application, it's running with a vulnerable version, and you're potentially vulnerable to those specific CVE. And then we can come with an auto-recommendation policies and say, if the application is vulnerable, then we need to fine-tune this specific policy to be a bit more accurate in order to prevent like potential exploitation. So we do this kind of analysis, and we can provide, obviously, in the report, we can provide all the information. And that's why we basically also map everything to the MITRE framework, for example, and we can provide like a grid, like a map of potentially attack vector vulnerabilities and not potentially a payload vulnerabilities.
That's excellent. Wow, thank you.
So we also do execution analysis. It's like post analysis after the execution, obviously. So we do static analysis before the execution. This is pre-execution, and this is like post-execution. So we try to analyze the behavioral and the chain of the processes. Once a process is being executed, so you can see the entire chain, which process was his parent and child processes. So we try to look for bad indicators inside this specific chain and come with a better policy fine-tuning and recommendation based on the chains. So we can see it's only, let's say, legitimate applications coming from Windows. It's a service, and if it's a service, let's take number one for an example. So we can see WinINet services and SVC hosts, which are all legitimate Microsoft applications, and basically this specific chain indicates that it's probably a service. So we can fine-tune and recommend policies based on services, which will be much more accurate. So those are a few examples for the auto recommendation our tool can provide. Let's take the first one for an example. So it's a script recommendation. Scripting is a challenge in endpoint security. It's not trivial to try and block this kind of attacks. So obviously we can see the full path. We can see the parent process that was executing this specific script, and we can come with a suggestion for a policy. Scripting is basically based on the risk appetite of the organization. So, during the POC stage, we can define with the customer his risk appetite, and based on that, we can provide a better policy that actually fits the organization needs and policies. So we can say if the customer is willing to accept low risk, then we can create specific policy. But if he is able to accept like a high risk, then we will recommend a different kind of policy. The next one is actually for security vendors. So we try to recognize an already installed security vendor and then come with a better policy recommendation. Let's take Semantic for an example. So obviously Semantic will try to read memory of processes, we try to do stuff in the operation system. So we just want to be aware during the deployment, which security vendors you have if they're allowed. Sometimes you install a security vendor and then, you move to another one, but you didn't delete the old one. So maybe you do want to enforce policies and say, okay, it's an old version, it's a deprecated one, so we don't want to use it. We can't install it because we don't have connection to the devices, but we can basically create policies and say, okay, this specific old version, I'm sorry for that. So we can create a policy and then block the actions of the deprecated application. And another recommendation, this is what we call the trusted publisher list. So we can create policies based on signatures and certificates of the binaries. So we can say signed binaries can do that, unsigned binaries cannot do that. So basically, we try using the static analysis of the binary. We can say, okay, this is a trusted executable. We know it's signed. The fact that it's signed, it's not giving us the ability or giving us the reason to try and approve that or not. But this is one indicator out of a few. And then we can say, okay, so we know the classification of the file is good. We know this is a signed executable, and the certificate, so we also do reputation analysis. So if we know that this specific executable signed by this specific vendor is creating most of the events, then we can come with recommendation for the policy and say, okay, this specific signature certificate needs to be added to our default list, and then it will reduce most of the events. So that's an example for that. So this is the MITRE attack framework, mapping. So we can come, usually we do the deployment in what we call discovery mode, like learning mode. So that's basically what would have been happened if it was in prevention mode. So we will have information about the application, if we would have blocked the application or it will be allowed. And then based on that, based on the learning mode, we can map everything to the MITRE framework. Okay. I can give you an example, let's say PowerShell, right? So we know that PowerShell can be, it's a legitimate, obviously, application, but usually attackers use that in a post-exploitation phase and in order to infect devices. So we can say, let's say we saw PowerShell that it is allowed on the device, so we can say, we can map that to the MITRE framework and say, okay, in the execution phase, PowerShell is currently allowed. Do we want to create a policy for that? And we can do that based on groups. We can say, okay, for the IT guys, PowerShell is allowed. And for, let's say, the HR, development, QA, PowerShell is not allowed. So we do have the way to do that based on groups, and then come with a better policy and a better organization policies and answer the risk appetite of the organization.
Wow.
So ultimately what we're talking about here, right, Homer, is instead of an organization having a discussion about whether something works or not, or whether or not, having alert fatigue, looking at thousands of alerts in their system, we can have a conversation about risk and risk appetite. And because what we're able to do is take all the data that we're collecting, turning that into actionable information about how you can apply not just AppGuard, but understanding the vulnerabilities in your environment as a generality, and having a much more higher level strategic conversation about the level of risk that you're willing to accept within your organization. Perhaps your R&D users, you might want to let them do a lot more, but to your point just now, other types of folks, you may not want to give them that access. And this is the type of tool that you need in order to really bring that conversation for CISOs up to that level of risk.
Right. No, that's a fantastic point, Kristen. And Tomer, again, thank you for this. I know that you've had a lot to do with developing this. And, for those on the call, recognize that, again, if you're an enterprise, this is going to help benefit, as Kristen has said, in terms of having different level of strategic discussions. If you're an MSSP and partner of AppGuard, you're going to be able to leverage this tool to provide these new value-added services, to really become that trusted advisor, which is what our goal is in AppGuard and providing this preventive technology. But this is, certainly in our opinion, for those who have been around AppGuard longer, a true game changer in being able to, one, implement the technology faster, but also, more importantly, be more valuable upfront to the prospective customer, and again, as we mentioned here, partners as well, in a manner that they hadn't in just trying to move some software. So fantastic, Tomer. And for those who don't know, a lot of work has been put into getting this out and getting a game time ready in the very, very near future. We can have follow-up questions as we get to the closing shortly about this. Can also go through a bit more of a demo at a later date. But we're really excited about this and the benefits it's going to bring, again, both our customers and partners who are going to be out there soliciting new customers for AppGuard. Just to try, as we get close to wrapping up here, AppGuard as a solution is across all verticals that we support. We currently are resonant globally in all verticals. We support not only customers on a very large scale, but also government entities at both the state and local level globally. Also have a large and growing partner ecosystem, which I'm responsible for, and a huge base of MSSPs. I mean, the fact is this is a solution that's been around for over 10 years. It works extremely well, and as we noted in the past, it was originally built for intelligence agencies that could not risk when they were connected once they turned on their computer being attacked in any potential way. So we have a reputation. The solution works extremely well across multiple verticals. And whether you're a company that has the need, an enterprise that wants to support, or are a partner that are looking to help provide additional services, you really should bring AppGuard into your portfolio. As I noted here, just in closing here, to date, there has not been one breach reported on an endpoint, which of course, again, is a desktop or laptop or servers that have AppGuard as part of their cyber stack. So we're very, very excited about that. And to close on one of the statements that I hope really resonates with everyone, as Bob Bigman once said, is AppGuard should be on every Windows system in the world. So again, as an enterprise, talk to us about it, figure out how we can work with you to implement a preventive technology as opposed to the traditional detect and respond, or enhance the detect and respond. Or from a partner perspective, let's work together so that we can help you be more effective and efficient in front of your customers. I'll open it up for questions. That ends our presentation. Almost right on time, 2:40. Here's our contact information. Mike, I don't know that we have any questions. Kristen, any thoughts in closing while we wait to check that?
Really? Sorry. I think we're all really excited here about what we've been able to do with the technology over the past few months. And in light of everything, the way that cyber attacks have accelerated over the past year, and the people that have been targeted by those cyber attacks in the past year, they really bother me personally. Instead of seeing some large corporate entity that I don't care about, it's my hometown, my hospital, my doctor's office, my friends, and on a day in an environment where we're seeing that happen on a day-to-day basis, I just feel that there's a better answer, there's a better approach, there's a better way to look at it. So that's what makes me proud to be part of this organization with these great folks that I work with. And thanks very much for the opportunity to chat. Thank you, Kristen. Appreciate it. Tomer, in closing, a few fair words before you say goodbye, Tomer.
No, not special. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Tomer. Again, very, very informative. Just in closing, one simple analogy that we often have used here, if you can get a pill that would prevent you from getting sick, I'd imagine most of you would take it. Or would you just get sick and then hope that the medicine cures you? AppGuard is an approach for taking a pill that prevents bad things from happening. We really hope that through this time today, you start considering on more fronts to bring AppGuard into your cyber stack. And for those, again, on the partnering side, I look forward to working with you on helping take share within the marketplace. I thank you all for joining today. Hope you have a fantastic Wednesday, and look forward to speaking with you all in the near future. Take care.
Thank you.